Good afternoon, everybody. This is Brad Horn from PTS, and I'm with Joseph Crable of a solution architect at PTS, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to do our best to pass on our knowledge after hundreds of our mobile RFID deployments on what are some of the best practices we've learned. We look at the agenda. I'm going to start off and just do a really high level and maybe basic to some of you. Hopefully you'll learn some new things that we've learned through our experiences. But just go through at a really high level the best practices we have seen our customers implement that worked, and that some of which we actually follow through on our side to make sure our deployments are successful. And then Joe's going to cover the next 4 bullets. I'm not even going to go through those right now. It's really just going to be, I shouldn't say just be, it's going to be a really great asset audit mobile RFID application that's going to integrate some of the best practices we've seen our customers take advantage of with our TracerPlus software. For those that don't know, TracerPlus is our mobile application development tool that has of late we've been doing a ton of mobile RFID with, and it supports the Android, Windows Mobile, and soon coming iOS operating systems. So, and then after that, hopefully we're going to pique some interest, and you'll have a lot of questions for us, and we'll do our best to answer those. To start off, what we've seen from our customers that have done successful deployments is they did their homework before even going out and talking to their vendors. They right on the internet, they understood the basics. What passive was versus active, what an LF, HF, or USF technology consisted of, and what was the most widely used. From there they moved on to their tags and learned about all the different tag manufacturers, the types of tags, the difference between an active tag and a passive tag, and the battery lives associated with them. Read ranges that may be associated with those technologies. For example, if you're working in a big open space, there may be acres and acres of equipment you're tracking, and you want to know where everything is at an instant. Maybe it's an active type of install, and you have to be prepared to spend some money for those tags. Versus you just want to know what's in that area, maybe, and aren't prepared to invest $20, $30 per tag. Maybe it's a passive install. Those are the basics that you really want to get your hands on. You also want to understand the basics of the actual hardware that you're going to use. Is it going to be a fixed deployment, meaning that your readers and antennas are in a fixed location, or do you want to use a mobile deployment because you have to cover a lot of space or are looking for things and want to have user interaction? You'll also do some research on the actual readers. This is one of those interesting areas that we would think everybody does a little research on their readers, their antennas, and the operating systems, and even the software they support. But sometimes we've seen installs take place where people have purchased hardware and just assume that when they got it in, their software that they were currently using, maybe it was a warehouse management system, they thought it was going to magically work on their RFID readers, and it doesn't. And they learned the hard way after maybe a $20,000 investment that what they purchased couldn't be used. And then they stumbled upon us, and we were there to hopefully pick up the pieces. You also want to, like I said, it kind of goes hand in hand, to understand the software that's going to be running these different types of technology. Is the software you're choosing going to work on both a mobile and a fixed reader, or is it specifically for a mobile reader? And will it support the operating system of the reader you're using? Maybe you buy an Android compatible reader, and then all of a sudden you want to use it on an iOS device. Is the software going to platform across between those two technologies, or are you stuck? And again, you want to understand for the fixed reader, where that software is actually running. Is it running on a reader, or is it running on a server somewhere? These are all basic questions, and there's a ton more. But you really should be spending a good amount of time researching, maybe in your spare time, what is being used in the field, what's popular, what's not popular, and what are the different technologies. And you also want to take a look at what is on the horizon. So often we've seen folks go out and buy tags, for example, and they may have spent $3 per tag because they were tagging metal items, and then they, a month later, a new great tag came out could be put on metal with, anything they want for a fraction of the cost. So you definitely want to, keep your ear to the ground and understand what's going on. After you do that, maybe you're the lead on this project, you definitely want to start asking everyone questions. You start with your internal folks that are asking for the RFID install. Maybe it's the management. What is the problem we're really trying to solve? Really, what's the problem? It's just cool, we want RFID, we hear it's the latest thing. Is it actually going to solve a problem for us, and is there going to be an ROI? We've done installs where we've spent a lot of time, made investments, and they do an ROI analysis at the end of the work. Maybe it's 6 months of work between both companies, thousands of dollars, invested by the customer, and they say, we looked at it, and the ROI is not there. We figured out we're only going to save $300 per facility by implementing the technology. Well, the question is, why didn't that take place at the beginning? It would have saved thousands of dollars. And maybe they would have looked at it and said, well, maybe if we use it a different way, it could have actually done more. So where is that ROI? Is it in efficiencies? Is it in a hospital where safety is a concern and you need to find equipment quickly? Is there a reduced liability by having the technology? Maybe a mobile RFID tracking application is going to make sure a worker entering a facility has the safety equipment he needs, and you can scan him quickly and detect that he has everything he needs on his person. Are there hidden savings? We constantly hear, especially from small businesses, about savings that we never even thought about. Maybe it's efficient use of space for an inventory, so they don't have to make everything as neat as they typically do, but they can pile things in a small area, especially in retail. They can pack more into a certain area, and then using certain RFID features, they can find them. Or maybe it's just a general user experience that makes their workers more efficient and makes their jobs easier. Maybe they don't have to climb a ladder anymore to find something. I mean, it might not be a big savings for the company, but for that worker, it may mean quite a bit in that they don't have to get up on heights. We really, there's so much that can be accomplished by the technology. You really should spend a lot of time asking those questions and really trying to figure out where the ROI is. And then develop a list of those features that ROI, that you need to be in place in your phase one to, reach that ROI. And then repeat the process for maybe your phase two. Maybe the first phase is, your must-haves, and your phase two is your nice-to-haves. Understand your read ranges. Do I really need that 30-foot or 100-foot or, much longer range of an active tag? Maybe not that it's really relevant in active tags for mobile RFID that we're doing, but maybe I can get by with a 10-foot read range. Do I really need that great read range? Or maybe it's an NFC application at a gate and you're scanning employees and you don't want a read range because you're going to pick up everybody else in the area and you need a short read range. So understand those read ranges you need, understanding the numbering you're going to use, the processes that are going to be implemented, and start defining those pretty thoroughly. Understand your data flow, and then review it. Start putting it on paper, and then search for what we call the low-hanging fruit. That's what we're hoping to show you some of today. Some of those things that you didn't know RFID could accomplish, but after talking to your technology providers, you learn that there's other things that can be accomplished. Don't be afraid to roll those low-lying fruit into your statement of work, or scope of work. So you want to really write this down, get your scope of work formatted, and understand that it can change slightly. RFID evolves, and it's important to understand that as you're doing it. What you start out with may not what you end up with, but it is important to keep a plan in place. So once you have the scope of work, you definitely want to go out and choose your providers, and I just said be prepared to modify your plans. Again, evaluate your technology providers thoroughly. Understand the software. Is it off the shelf? Is it a flexible tool? If it's off the shelf, well, maybe there's not much you can change in it. What is that cost of that change if I needed that feature added? Or if it's a tool, what is it going to cost me to get it set up and running? For example, at PTS, our software TracerPlus is a is a rapid application development tool, which, when first delivered, it may not do what you want it to do. It has to be configured via a process, whether it be the end user or us, by looking at the scope of work and creating the application, versus there's other applications that may do everything you need right up front, but may not have the room to grow or support what's around the corner. So you definitely want to understand the software you're looking at. The other thing that especially on our side, what we find kind of interesting at times is some people or institutions or companies get caught up on the bells and whistles versus what their core need is. So really write down what you are trying to accomplish, and it starts with that, number 2 slide that we were showing. Understand what you're trying to accomplish and try to get rid of those cool features that really don't accomplish anything. Simplicity is really a necessity at many times, especially with an initial rollout. You don't want to create a monster by adding in bells and whistles that aren't needed. You want to keep it simple, to the task, to perform, those must-have phase 1 items. And from there, you can grow it. Also understand what you can accomplish in-house versus out-of-house. Again, a lot of our customers create applications of their own. They have the resources, and they want to create those apps. So they see the savings that they have a development team, and they want to create their own applications, versus other companies that want to sub it out and have someone like Joe, who's next to me, create the application. Understand those type of things. Even with fixed RFID, I'll just touch on that. Understand if you're going to do your own wiring versus the reseller or the integrator wants to do the wiring for you, and understand those costs. But most importantly, also get the costs up front. What's an upfront cost? What's my initial investment? And be aware of those yearly costs, maintenance costs. Maybe there's certain items you don't need. We often hear from customers who have bought hardware from resellers, and they don't even really understand what they bought. They bought the hardware before they even had a software package, and they have services wrapped in that the software provider is going to do. And they already paid the bill, and they have a contract in place for 3 years for doing something that the software provider is going to do. So again, don't get in the game until you understand everything going on with the software and hardware providers. Also, talk to the hardware providers and the software providers, and understand what they're supporting versus what they're just selling. Again, often we talk to customers that they've bought hardware and it's just sitting there collecting dust. They got it. They were ready to use it. They called up the reseller who sold them the stuff, and they said, well, we don't provide that, or we don't support that. Or maybe there's an overlap and they're paying 2 bills like I just talked about, and they only need to pay 1. After all this information is gathered, again, you want to go back to your plan. You want to choose your suppliers, assign scope of work tasks, create a testing schedule, do a lot of testing, and then get ready for your pilots and deployment schedule. Again, that's a lot of high-level stuff. It may be basic to a lot of you. Maybe hopefully you picked up a good tidbit or here and there. The next slide is a little more interesting, I think. It's kind of the hints that we've seen. First off, don't get caught up on a tag right away because of price. Understand the difference in your RFID tags and test multiple tags extensively in the environment that you're using. Don't buy 1 million tags up front because you're trying to save 5 cents per tag. We've talked to tens to hundreds of customers who have tags in place that are not the right tag for them, but they have to use them now because they purchased them. Thousands of dollars wasted. Test tags thoroughly. I can't say it enough. I know we have some tag suppliers on the call, and I think they would agree. You really want to understand RFID tags that you're buying. It's not a barcode label. That's very simple and simplistic, and you scan the barcode, and that's what's entered or goes into the mobile computer. Tags have a lot of variables to them between the chipsets, the antennas, read ranges, amount of memory they have. You want to test them extensively. Then you want to test your hardware and compatibility with the software. You want to go through that thoroughly before you decide to do your pilot and make sure everything works as it's expected to. And then from our standpoint, we create a scope of work with our customers. Make sure you test the software and it does what it's supposed to do before you put it in pilot. So many problems can be avoided by doing that simple testing. Maybe it's 20 hours of testing done that will catch little things or things that were overlooked because we're using this new technology that's very different than a barcode or a piece of paper that you've been using by just picking up the technology and using it. It sounds basic, but again, we'll underline that one for you. This is one that we've been running into lately as we're doing bigger and bigger deployments. Choose your pilot site wisely and use your superstars for the pilot. What we mean by this is you're going to want to see with your pilot what's possible, what works, what doesn't work, where we need to refine the application or the hardware, the tags. And we want to see best case metrics. We don't want to give it to maybe our worst run site because we want to improve it right away. Because what we've seen is that's where the failure comes in. I mean, if they're not running a site properly with the current technology, giving them RFID may not necessarily fix the problem and puts your pilot at risk. Superstars will set your metrics and they'll show you what's possible, and they'll be able to put the goals in place that you need for the other sites on the deployment. Plus, they're going to give you the necessary feedback you need. So just don't hand someone technology at a site and run away and say, okay, now test it. You want to monitor that pilot closely, have weekly meetings, see how things are working, and refine it. Also, understand where the resistance exists in the pilot site. For example, in Mobile RFID Asset Tracking, a lot of times we're giving technology to a staff at a location who may see a headcount reduction or a movement from one job to another job because they're going to speed up the process so much. So you really have to understand and set the stage correctly during the pilot phase of what you're trying to accomplish and what's expected. Just because you give someone something doesn't mean they're actually going to use it. If their job primarily is to, go out and fix personal computers, or not personal, but computers for the company, and asset tracking is secondary or third on the list of their job functions, you might find after a couple weeks of pilot that they kind of ignored this new way of doing it. So you have to set those expectations up front. And finally, constantly listen and involve the application. Everybody, we have a lot of customers come in and they think that, RFID is going to magically solve all their problems. And it doesn't. It makes people more efficient, and when put in a good process with a good plan around it, with good technology, it can make people a lot more efficient. But perfection does not exist on that first attempt. It's a refined process. We found this little, piece of this little artwork underneath: plan, do, check, adjust. It's just a constant cycle, and with RFID technology evolving as quickly as it does, it's important that that is constantly followed. It's almost should be put on everybody who's a project manager for an RFID project, put it on the wall. That should be the constant process. And you should be relying on your hardware and your software providers to also assist you in that process. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Joe. A little background on Joe. Joe's been with PTS for 12 years. Joe has deployed or created probably 1,000+ mobile applications. In the last 5 years, I would say, Joe, he has probably created a few hundred mobile RFID applications. And what I asked Joe to do for this webinar is to take the best things he's seen done for a mobile RFID application and roll them up, the best he can to show in a short amount of time. So it was a tough task. So he's going to show you, some of the best features that mobile RFID can offer to a customer. With that being said, here's Joe.
All right. Thank you, Brad. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm going to give you a demonstration of an application I set up for mobile RFID, utilizing an asset audit, as well as being able to locate assets, mark them as found, and also mark them as updated to a new location. So I'll first start out by showing you a database that we have So the beauty of TracerPlus is it enables you to tie in your existing back-end systems and databases into the mobile application. And that's what I did here using our TracerPlus Connect software. I'm just tying into an Access database that I created and then added some assets in that we can actually scan. So you'll see here I have a list of 35 assets in a database. And what I'm going to bring up next is our mobile device. So I'm just remotely controlling an RFID-enabled mobile device that will be able to scan the tags. So we have two options here along with a third sync option. The first being to inventory, so that's basically an asset audit to see that assets are where they're expected to be, and then also show what's missing and what may be found in an unexpected location. And the second app would be the locate function, which will kind of piggyback off of this inventory. That's going to take basically what we're missing from the inventory, load it to this locate session, and then we'd be able to walk around with the RFID gun holding down the trigger. Then as it finds items on that missing list, it'll pop up a Geiger counter, and then we can further locate those items and then set where we actually found them. So I'm going to first start with our inventory. And if I go into this session, we should see a form that I developed and designed. So the first thing you'll be able to do is select the current location you are inventorying for. So I'm going to select room 1. Then we're simply just going to go ahead and scan around the room. Hopefully you can hear some of these beeps. But as I scan items, you should hear the beeps. So that means I'm picking up the RFID tags. And then you'll see that they're showing up in the grid below. So what we're doing is actually queuing up these scans. So you'll see we read 25. So now I'm going to click this Post Scans button. So what that's going to do is update our asset list with whether it was found or not. And it's bringing us to this view of what we found, what's missing, and then what we found but wasn't expected for that location. Looks like I got lucky here and actually found all the 15 assets that were in this location. We didn't find anything that wasn't expected, so then we can go to scan a new location. We'll switch to room 2. And once again, we will hear some beeping as we read some tags. And you'll see the counts go up as we're reading. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the post option. So now we see that we found 9 of those assets expected for this location. We see 1 missing asset, and then we also have 2 that were found but not expected in this room. So if we go to the missing assets, we can click View. So we'll see our missing asset here. So now what we can do at this point, we can actually try to locate it when we're doing these scans. So we'll click on it in the grid. It'll show the tag ID in the field below. And then we'll click this Locate button, and that's going to pop up our Geiger counter. So one thing I want to talk about here is power level. So you'll notice that I have it set to 24. So depending on your environment and how close rooms or locations may be, I actually dialed down my power a little bit so that I didn't read some of the tags in the adjacent room. So you'll see I set it to 24. But when you're using Geiger counter, you may want to adjust that to max power. So what you can do on the Geiger dialog is actually click this double arrow. That'll bump it up to max power. Then we can hold down our trigger. Then as an item gets close, or we start to find an item, you'll start to see the meter increase as well as beep more frequently. If I pull that away, you'll see it stops beeping. So you can kind of home in on the tag that you're trying to locate. And then once you're actually able to locate that item, click the Close Dialog button, and then click the Found button. And that's going to mark that asset as found. If we go back, we now see that we found 10 assets. No more are missing. But then we still have 2 found but not expected assets to deal with. So if we go to View there, once again, a similar process. We can click on it. We can say, oh, yes, this is supposed to be here. So we can click Update. So now that's going to update this asset to this room. So now it'll be reflected in our table once we sync the data back that it's now in room 2. If we wanted to, we could do the same with this. Click Update. And then we'll go back and we'll see that now we have 12 found assets. Then we're going to scan one more location. We're going to scan room 3. And then I will scan some tags. I'll try to miss a few here. And we'll post those. So you'll see here I only found 2 and I missed 6. So if we go to the 6, once again we can click on it, click Locate. We'll locate that item, and we'll click Close, and then mark it as found. And if we go back, we'll see that now we have 3 found assets and 5 missing assets. So say you've completed your audit, you weren't able to find these assets, and you're finished for the day. So we'll come back here and exit, and now what we want to do is try and locate these missing assets. So we're going to go into the Locate function, and then what I'm going to do is sync. So that's going to sync based on those items that I just scanned, and using some sync filters, we're able to see the locations that were scanned, but the items that were not marked as found. So you'll see that we actually missed 5 items, so it loaded those 5 items to our Tag to Locate session. So now you would just simply take the gun, walk around, and press the trigger in, and then if it comes across an asset on this list, it's automatically going to pop up that tag locator for you, and then you just simply press the trigger again to try and locate the item. So you'll see we've located it, and then once we close this dialog, we can actually mark where we found this asset. So you could have a lot more locations in this drop-down. I'm just keeping it simple. So let's just say we found it in room 1, then we can mark it as found, and it's going to remove it from our list. Then we can hold down the trigger and walk around some more, and it should find the next item. And once again, we'll use the Geiger counter to locate that. And we'll do the same thing. We'll say it was found in room 1. So we'll click Found. So now we're left with 3 assets to locate. So let's say we're done. We couldn't find these other assets. So now the last thing we want to do is sync our updated information back to the database. So I'm going to come to the sync form. I'm going to click the Sync Asset Updates. And what that's going to do is take the data from that asset list and then sync it back to this database. So if I refresh it now, you'll see that we now have columns updated with our last update date. So that's taken the time that I actually did the update. And then you also see some of the assets that were expected in room 3 are now showing up in room 1 based on that missing report that I just did. And then also those unexpected tags that we found while scanning room 2, they were actually from room 3, but since they were found in room 2, we've marked those 2 as room 2. And once that is completed, if you wanted to go back to locate, you could still try to find these assets and then update with another sync. Or if you wanted to perform a new audit, we can just come back here, click the Sync Assets to Device. That's going to reset everything back to not being scanned, so you can perform another audit. And if I went to Locate at this point and did a sync, it should clear this list out for us, because since we haven't done an audit, we're not going to have anything to locate. So now it is blanked out back to 0. And then we can repeat those steps of the inventory of selecting the locations and then scanning your tags. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you in terms of the demonstration. So I kind of want to talk a little bit more about some of the settings that we've chosen to use here. So this is our desktop tool for those of you who don't know. This is where you can create your own mobile barcode, RFID, and NFC applications. It's free to use. You only license the devices that you use. So these are my sessions that I've used. I have that inventory session, the locate session. Then I have a few lists that are actually hidden from view that are used to hold the asset list data as well as our tags to locate, and then our sync form. And if we just jump over to the form designer, this is where you can actually design how the form's going to look on the device. It's a nice drag and drop environment where you can kind of configure it to the look and feel that you want, add your own logos and colors, kind of brand it the way you want. So if we jump back to inventory and we look at the data capture settings, we have some RFID settings here that I've utilized. So one of the first things that's definitely important to know about the tags that you received is how they were encoded. So if they were encoded in hexadecimal, which is typically the industry standard, or if they were encoded in ASCII or text. So that would enable you to encode your, maybe your asset IDs. You want to encode those as your actual EPC values in the tags. So in those cases, that would typically be encoded in ASCII. So that way you can encode characters other than 0 through 9 and A through F. So that's where we see ASCII being used a lot. But like I said, typically hexadecimal is default unless you specify that you want them encoded in ASCII. Another good setting here is the radio power, as I was talking about before. So you want to kind of feel out your environment to see what type of tag distance you want to be able to read, as well as also not leaking into an adjacent room and picking up items from a different room. So this is definitely a best practice to kind of play around with this power setting to see what gets you the best results, both getting it at a distance that you like, but also not reading tags that are in an adjacent room or area. So as you do increase the power level, it is pretty exponential. So each increase will up the power pretty significantly with a max power of 30. So you'll just want to play around with that, test that very thoroughly. And then one other option here you can set is the memory bank size. Typically, most tags use the 12 and 64 byte memory, but we've seen 16 byte EPC tags. So that may be something you would need to set in here if you are in fact reading a tag with a larger memory bank so that TracerPlus can interpret that data correctly. We also have an option, which I didn't show today, to read user memory on a scan. So RFID tags consist of multiple memory banks, the two main ones being EPC and then also a user bank, which is typically a larger bank where you can actually write additional information about the item to that bank. So if you do have tags with that or using TracerPlus to write that information, you can read that whenever you read an EPC. And then the final thing I want to talk about here is the smart form rule. So this is very important to use, especially for mass scanning. What gets you the maximum speed performance of reading multiple tags. This basically tells TracerPlus where to put that tag information so it doesn't have to figure it out on its own. So that speeds up that process of reading those multiple tags into that queued grid that I was showing before. So typically with your asset audits, and you want to do multiple reads, that's where you would use this cache grid that I had set up here. I'm not really going to go into this much, but I had set up a cache grid to basically take the location, the RFID, and the date that I have hidden off the form, and that's what's using it to update our asset list once we post that data. So we're queuing up all those scans versus picture having to scan each individual barcode one by one, needing line of sight, trying to find the barcode. Just picture how long that would take for, let's say, even 50 assets versus just taking the gun, holding the trigger, waving it around, and you're picking up those 50 assets, within 10 seconds or so. So you can see how much time that would save you. Some other things you could talk about is the tag reading, whether we do whether you want to read multiple or you only want to read one tag at a time. So that's depending on the application, and you can set that here based on trigger release or tag read. Most people we find use this UHF RFID for mass reading or tag locating. We don't find too many instances where they actually are looking to read tags one by one, unless they actually want to write tags, write information to tags. So as I mentioned, TracerPlus can write to tags. So you could scan an item, enter, make, model, type, something like that, hit a submit button, and then maybe write that information to the user bank of the tag. In that case, that would kind of limit the need for a database to see what that actual item is. So that's where you could take advantage of that user bank. But that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. I do want to mention, I'll just bring up our website. The software I did demonstrate today is available for a free trial. By just going to TracerPlus.com, take a trial, and then you can get the free download of desktop, and then also the Connect software, which is for syncing. You can download a trial of that. And then we also have our Mobile Solution Center, where we do have some sample apps available for you to try that are free to use. Use as is or modify on your own. So we do have some RFID setups in here that you can kind of get started with. So that would be a good way to get going. And then lastly, just if you do need any support, we do have a bunch of support resources. So we do offer some training resources. You have the training videos and webinars such as today, so this will be recorded. We have our open office hours that we run twice every week for TracerPlus and once every 2 weeks for the fixed software. So that's a good hour to dial into. You can speak live with a tech, ask your questions to kind of help you through your process. And we have our knowledge base and support forums. So, knowledge base gets you answers to common questions where you can ask, other questions in the forum. Not only us, but other users can offer you feedback as to what they've experienced with this. That's pretty much what I wanted to show you today.
Thanks, Joe. Good job. So just one other thing I figured we mentioned quickly for resources. The YouTube channel is becoming one of our favorite spots for our users to get the information they need. We try to put up as much video learning as possible. It's very important to us, the education of our users. So please feel free to subscribe there, watch some of the videos. There's some fairly technical videos where Joe and some of our other technical representatives are actually setting up applications and showing you what's possible. With that being said, we'll open it up for questions now. If anyone has questions, please type those into the question area on the GoToMeeting panel or GoToWebinar panel. Okay, I see one question. Fixed versus mobile, what are the main deployment differences you see? Really what we're seeing mostly is the understanding by our users once they get going that fixed is not maybe what they envisioned it. Clearstream RFID software is our fixed software. They sometimes come in thinking that they're going to put in fixed readers with antennas and cover an entire factory with RF signal. And what they quickly learn is maybe that's not exactly what's possible. Maybe we are going to instead just control segments of the facility when something enters or leaves the facility or maybe into a storage room. Really what they're using the fixed RFID is for just, again, a check-in, check-out process or knowing that it is in a zone, so they're setting up portals. Where they're using the mobile RFID is like what Joe showed, the hunting or the searching for items and then for the mass scanning of an inventory to get that exact count. Because you're moving the antenna around versus having a stationary antenna, you're getting, you have the opportunity to get an exact match of your inventory, a true inventory, much more accurate than a barcode-enabled inventory.
We do have a user that has raised his hand, so if you do have a question, please type that into the question panel, and we will be able to address that for you.
Next question is on tag prices for RFID. That's really the moving mark where we've seen the most change. I think, where we used to not even be able to tag metal items for under $3 each. Now we're seeing those prices drop into the 75 to 50 cent range, with up to 10 foot to even sometimes 20 foot with fixed read range. And they're printable by yourself. So that's been really the big evolution we've seen. It's just changing very quickly and opening up the possibility to RFID to, fixed asset tracking. For example, IT asset tracking used to be tough to do because of the amount of metal content and the need for it to have human readable text on it. It wasn't possible to around a year ago when Confidex, in partnership with Zebra, released their on-metal tags that are printable. And we also see tags dropping into the 10-cent range for your standard labeling of boxes or folders.
All right, so we have another question here. When you were doing the reading of the RFID tags, how far away were you? How far away can you get? I know it all depends on the tag. Can you elaborate a little more on this? So when I was reading those tags, I was probably about a foot away, because it's right here at my desk and I have the gun sitting to my side. So I was holding the tags pretty much right up to it. However, I don't know if you noticed, it was definitely picking up more than I had in front of the readers, because it was picking up tags, I think, from the adjacent office from me. So read ranges are definitely not an exact science. It does require a lot of testing, a lot of different tags. So you want to know what you're tagging, the material, whether it's plastic, it's metal, it's liquid. And just based on those types, you can at least start off with a base tag of something that's meant for on metal, or something that's meant for liquid, or just a general tag that can be used on paper folders or cardboard boxes or something like that. So that's a good base point. And then read ranges are going to vary based on the environment, since everyone's environment is different, depending on where it's placed, where the reading is being done from. Each tag kind of gives an expected read range. Sometimes they even break it out into mobile versus fixed, because you typically get twice the range with a fixed reader versus a mobile reader. So keep that in mind when you see listed read ranges for tags that you're looking at, that it may differ depending on mobile versus fixed. So it's really going to depend on the environment, the tag, what it's being placed on, and what's reading it. And you can get any read ranges anywhere from a foot to 20, 30 feet, 40 feet maybe, depending on the right tag.
Yeah, and I think what we're commonly seeing is the on-metals are 5 to 10 foot. One of the things where we say perfection does not exist, I was specifically thinking of one install where the users were not too excited about RFID, and they were using it for finding lost assets, exactly as Joe was showing. They were, when they started, they had hundreds of lost assets in every facility, and they had it down to the tens, and they complained that they could only scan from 5 foot away, and they had to put their hand into the cubicle to use Geiger. 5 foot is definitely better than not being able to locate it at all. So you really have to keep an eye on the complaints and understand where they're coming from. And also, as the tags evolve, those distances become greater. And do you even want the greater distance, especially when you're scanning between cubicles? With on-paper tags, your standard low-end tag, again, we'll see in a 20-foot range. That's pretty easy to achieve because, again, there's no interference. And the environment is so critical. You really have to study the environment. Too often we hear from customers, they come in to buy the tags for deployment or already bought the tags for the deployment, and we ask about how much testing they've done, and they've said, well, we've hung them up and we can, held them in their hands and they've scanned 20, 30 feet. So we ask, well, did you put them on the assets or the inventory you're tracking? And the answer is no. That's critical. And then we also ask if they put them in the environment they're tracking. Like, for example, if you're putting your tags on inventory and all the shelving is solid metal, you're going to have a totally different performance than you would if you had wood shelving.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that too, that if you're testing tags, make sure you're testing them on the items you're actually placing them on. Because we've seen a lot of users just test the tag, just in their hand. And if it's an on-metal tag, those are actually designed to read better and further when it's placed on metal. So if you're reading it just, in open air, not placed on anything, you're probably going to see a reduced read range because it is meant to be read on metal. So that's one thing to note when testing tags, to make sure you put them on the item and that you're testing in the expected environment.
There's another question here. Can you write or edit information on tags via ClearStream, or is it only through TracerPlus? Currently, we, since the inception of TracerPlus, have had that functionality of writing to tags. Quite honestly, it's not commonly used. We prefer not to write critical information to the tag when data is being synced to the database, because we are concerned about data synchronization inconsistencies. So we want the real data to be on the database. However, when they do write to tags, or maybe they're actually encoding a tag or changing the tag, it's done through the mobile. ClearStream is a fixed system, and we haven't had too many requests for tag writing, just because in the fixed system, you're really not, unless it's set up as a desktop application, you're writing through a PC, so it's just not as common. It's easier to do through the mobile computers, but again, it's something we've always considered, and we just haven't implemented because of the amount of requests has been extremely low. Can tags break and become unreadable, and how often? There are such things as bad tags, and it does happen. However, Joe, I don't know about you, but I haven't heard of any.
Honestly, I don't think I've ever heard of anybody reporting broken tags. I mean, it's possible that they did and just didn't say anything, but I think it's pretty rare. I think you'd have to really roughhouse it to, cause it to be unreadable anymore. I'd imagine you would have to break the chip somehow.
And then all the tags should have specs associated with them and their environments, and the type of material that they're printed on has a big. We think that's pretty important to do the printing on as a backup as well. And what's exciting about the mobile readers that we primarily work with, the manufactured by Zebra, is they also have a barcode reader on them, so you can barcode scan and RFID scan at the same time. So if something does break, you do have the backup. I'll turn the next question over to you, Joe.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on that, users often, when they're getting tags printed or printing them themselves, they'll encode the tag with what they want, but then they'll also print a barcode variation of that, or either, maybe even an asset ID barcode, just as they can still use barcode technology as they're kind of transitioning over to RFID, because these can actually replace the existing barcode labels, but also double as the RFID when they're ready to transition to that. So we do have another question here, if you can tie into an AS400 database rather than Access. So TracerPlus Connect that I was referring to can connect to multiple sources, ranging from as low end as a text file, Excel workbook, up to most of your ODBC databases, including Access, SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle. I'm not too familiar with AS400 myself, but I'm pretty sure there's users out there using TracerPlus with AS400.
Yeah, I think there's some middlewares that they enable for the AS400 systems. It's pretty common usage. And if you really have a particular install you're questioning on AS400, we could definitely turn that over to one of our database experts here at PTS. Like I said, this is really, we're trying to keep it as high level as possible, but also just show you what's possible and what we see the best installs utilized within mobile RFID asset tracking. I think Joe did a bang-up job showing, what's possible with the mobile apps. We've seen customers just use Geiger and be very successful. Talking about finding items that used to take 2 hours to find now take 30 seconds. It's sort of amazing what's possible. So we hope you investigate more. Feel free to call your TracerPlus representative or Clearstream representative to learn about fixed RFID. We'll leave it open for another minute or so if anyone else has any questions.
And if you do have any questions, at the conclusion of this webinar, our contact information is on the screen. So feel free to reach out to us. And as Brad mentioned, the YouTube channel is very useful for a lot of users. Not only is it sort of training and tutorial videos, but we even do sometimes hardware reviews, best practices, how to set things up. So that's a good resource to see what we're about. And then you can also follow us on social media as well.
I think we also have a Geiger video that we shot a year or so ago. I think it's just simple videos we put up showing how the technology is used. And I think we have a Geiger video show in our solution center finding lost assets. Okay, it looks like we've answered all the questions. Hopefully this was valuable. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to call us or email us via the contact details on the last slide. Thanks so much.